So, hello everybody. You still awake? Just about? So my name's Ruth Cheesley. I run a company called Viria Technologies. We specialise in open source technologies, but web design wise we only use Joomla. And I've been doing Joomla for about 7 years, something like that, 6, 7 years. I'm flagging a little bit because I've had a cold all weekend and so forth, so I may have to stop to have a glass of water every now and then, so just bear with me a bit. So yeah, this session is really about stepping outside of your comfort zone a bit, I guess, if you're new to Joomla, because we're going to talk about content, CCKs, content construction kits. At the moment, you might not know what they are, or even why you might want to use them, but we're going to go into that. So I'll try and make sure that I don't talk too much gobbledygook, but if there's something that I say that is an assumption and you don't know what I'm actually talking about, do please ask. And there's not many of you in here, so I'm quite happy to take questions as we go through. It might be that I say, well, I'm just coming on to that. So, and I'll make these slides available online afterwards if you need to reference back to them. So, Joomla is really awesome. Fantastic. Amazing system. You can do so much with it. But sometimes we get to the point where you need to do a little bit more than what the normal article management can do. Sometimes you need a little bit more power in the system, or you need a bit more flexibility, or you need to have extra stuff like extra fields that you assign about, say you're writing a website about a musician, and anytime you add something into a category of albums, you're going to want to know the year, the genre, the number of songs that were on there, and an image that's associated with it. Yeah, you probably can do that with the core Joomla, but sometimes you get to the point where you can't do everything with what comes out of the box. What comes out of the box, you've been through Joomla 3, I understand, yesterday if you're in this stream. So you get your normal article manager, and it looks like that on Protostar, the new template on Joomla 3. But it can't do anything. You get to a point where you think, actually, I need a little bit more. So it might be that you want to associate an image with an article, and you can do that here, but it doesn't resize the image. It doesn't make the thumbnails for the image, etc., etc., etc. So at that point, it's when you're starting to think, am I trying to fit a square peg into a round hole? Am I trying to make the Joomla system do something that it doesn't really want to do? But also, am I making my life harder because I'm having to manually resize all these images every time I put them in there? I'm having to think about ways that I can make, if you're doing websites for clients, you want to make it as idiot-proof as possible. So, if you're having to tell them to go through 3 steps to add an extra piece of information onto an article, 9 times out of 10 they'll get it wrong. Someone will get it wrong, and that ends up with more support calls to you. So at that point is when you have to start thinking, well, what else is out there? Is there a way that I can have articles that have images that are resized to the sizes that I specify? No matter what size the client uploads, it always makes these size images, so it makes your life easier. Is there a way that I can have all the articles in that category using blue hyperlinks, and all the ones in that category using red hyperlinks, and all the ones in that one using orange hyperlinks? Is there a way that I can do that? And the answer is yes, there is. But you have to find the right building blocks. You have to find the right system for you, the right system for whatever it is that you're building, that allows you to have the functionality that you want without the massive complexity. If you only want a couple of small tweaks like resizing images, you don't want this whole whizzy, customize everything, build your own component stuff. You probably want to go down the route of something that's very easy to use, very simple, a couple of tabs where you can just choose an image, upload the image, makes it all the right size for you, and it's easy to style. So that in some ways is the challenge, and the only way you get to that point is having a go with them, having a go with these different extensions and seeing which one suits you and which one works in the situations that you're in. So, anyone in this situation? What is a CCK? Anyone know? Anyone want to hazard a guess what a CCK is? It stands for Content Construction Kit. So just from those words, what do you think it does?
I'm hoping that's the way of
Anyone else? Anyone else want to have a go at guessing what a CCK might be? Go on. Go on.
Oh, I thought it was what Joomla was designed for. I thought Joomla was a CCK in a way. Pulled stuff in, which is I was surprised there's another layer to it over the top of what's already there. I thought the idea was you put your content in there and it resizes and put it up on the site. That's what's it's
more to web pages than just somebody typing in a text article and pictures.
So it's taking what Joomla that doesn't bring it to another level. Really,
I mean, what a CCK does, and there are different types of content construction kits that you can use for Joomla. Over the years, newer ones have come in, and they work slightly differently. It gives you more options, so you don't have to just be stuck with the Joomla article system. Okay, so it might be that you need to add extra images. It might be that you need to have extra fields where you can provide information. It might be that you need to put stuff into several different categories and not only just into one category. All kinds of things. And what the content construction kit does is it extends what is available to you in com content, either by bolting stuff on or by replacing the article manager with a different version, a different system. So some of the CCKs for Joomla, all your articles and your categories and everything stay in the normal Joomla articles and categories, but those extensions add extra functionality to them. So basically link extra information into those tables. But some of the CCKs for Joomla just are a whole component in themselves, and they don't use the native Joomla articles and categories at all. They use their own. And that some of them even use their own access control levels. So there are different ways of doing what we're talking about. There are different systems.
Well, why wouldn't, I don't know what's the reason, but why wouldn't Joomla itself expand to include these things as a sort of core functions, obviously over time and testing things like that? Is it that they're going to be eventually expanded to include these things, but it hasn't actually happened yet?
Some of the things have been expanded, like if we go back to the slide where I was looking at the articles, you were working on Joomla 3. Have any of you come from 1.5, 2.5? Well, images never used to be in 1.5, 2.5. You never used to be able to associate an image in this way. You could put it in here and resize it, but there was no way of doing this. And also you have an intro text image and a full text image and so forth. So some features that only used to be available in CCKs, they are making their way into the core. But what we have to remember is that Joomla is used by millions of websites that do loads of different things. So you have to weigh up the advantages of adding specific stuff into the core of Joomla if it's not going to be relevant for everybody who uses it. So some of these CCKs are very, very specialized and really highly configurable. So you can do like tons and tons and tons of stuff with it, which wouldn't necessarily fit well in the core of Joomla because it's complex and it's confusing, and 90% of people only use 10% of the features. If you make the 10% of the features so complicated that they can't understand why they'd want to use it, then it becomes less usable, if that makes sense. Yeah. Yeah, and that's really important for the Joomla project because we have everything from complete beginners to really, really high-end specialist developers, and we have websites from a basic hobbyist site up to international news portals. So anything that comes into the core has to be considered in that light, that it has to be okay for all people who use it. So one of the options that we have in Joomla is called K2. K2 is probably the easiest one to get your feet wet with. It's very similar in terms of the layout to Joomla. So the article management system is very similar. Your categories are very similar.
So it's a replacement one then?
K2 is a replacement one. I'll come on to that in a second. It's had over 1 million downloads. And actually, before Joomla got, in 2.5, we got the categories, nested categories. So you could make your own structure. In 1.5, you had to have a section and a category. Well, K2 was the first extension that came out that kind of threw that out and said, no, you can do your own structure. So it was one of the first ones that had that, and it's also one of the first extensions that had its own access control level, so you could control who could write into different categories, who could publish into different categories, and so forth. So it really has been kind of like at the leading edge of content, and as a result of that, it was used, and still is used, in a lot of publishing sites, because it gave that functionality before Joomla had it, basically, before it was available in Joomla. So K2 is a really good one to have a go at when you're first starting. Another one that's quite popular is Zoo. Zoo is made by Utheme, and it's quite popular. I would say it's a little bit more complex. They do have quite good documentation, so it is pretty easy to get your head around it if you're willing to read the manual, which, let's face it, a lot of us aren't. But it is a little more tricky to get the hang of if you don't read the manual. And me, for one, I like to be able to install stuff and just be able to understand how it works and figure it out just by clicking on what have you. Personally, I didn't find that with Zoo, but it is extremely powerful, probably more powerful than K2. So it is definitely something to have on your radar, but maybe play around with it. It's not one that I would say learn how to use it in the first time that you have to use a CCK for a client, because you'd be putting yourself under a lot of pressure. It's one I would say you probably want to spend some time reading over the documentation, watching a couple of the videos, actually figuring out how it works. But it allows you to create apps where you can customize the fields that are within the apps. It uses display elements, so it's quite easy to style and configure. You can do everything from a cookery website to an app store to everything with Zoo. So in that regard, it's probably more advanced than K2, but because of that, by the nature of that, it's a little bit more complicated to get your head around how it actually works.
And again, it's a replacement.
Zoo is a replacement for content. Yeah, I had to think about that one then. So it has its own tables.
Are any of these just writing tools, so to speak, or are they ones that actually have to be there to run it as well? Because if you have somebody have a tool like website construction,
Yeah.
HTML or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
you put some things in there, nice easy boxes, and it would then construct the HTML site in the background.
Yeah.
And then you could sort of throw away the thing you used to write it, and you got yourself a site, which was then it wasn't possible to see how it had been written.
These are just these are components that will always be installed on your site.
You can't get rid of them once they're there. They have to be there to run it.
Yes, and K2 and Zoo, for example, because they use their own tables, that component has to be installed to use that data.
And they're all like that, are they?
No, Seblod, which is this one, is a French product, and that one actually extends the Joomla tables. So it uses content, it uses the categories from Joomla and it extends them. So in some ways, this one is possibly better to use if you are concerned about a component that is not using Joomla core, if you're worried about that.
Think about if you're upgrading it sometime, and you get a new version of Joomla, and the original company is not providing any more updates.
Yes.
You've got to wind everything back again to
Yep.
core functionality.
And that's one of the things that I'll talk about, and one of the things you need to bear in mind when you're looking at these, because new extensions come along all the time. You get new extensions, there's like 6,500 in the JED, the extensions directory. You do have to apply a little bit of rational thinking when you're thinking about adopting something, particularly if it's for a client, and particularly if it's for a client that requires future-proofing. If it's a brand new CCK, I'd be a little bit hesitant. You know, I probably would use it myself for a little bit and have an idea of the community that surrounds it, whether there's third-party extensions that bolt into it and so forth. But there is less of a risk using something like this because this extends the core Joomla tables. So worst case scenario, if you lose that extension, all your content is still in the content tables. Not all of it, some of it will be in other tables that are linked to, but it's less of a risk.
I think the three of us are all basically doing our own website. We're not
doing your own website. Yeah, okay.
I took websites on big, but I've never used, I've just used the normal.
Normal article manager. Yeah. I mean, for a long time, I only used the normal article manager. It was probably when we got to 1.5 and when I started to do more commercial sites that I started to look at K2. And I think a lot of the sites that I do in K2, I probably could do in content, but it would take longer, and it doesn't have some of the features that were core for those clients, if that makes sense. If to put those features into core Joomla would have been more problematic, because core Joomla is updated quite frequently, so then I'd have to maintain those updates, basically. And when there's something that already does that for you, I have to make that decision of, am I going to make all those changes myself and have to update that, or can I use something extra? And that is always the question that you have to ask when you're doing Joomla, when you come across something new. The benefits of having something that does something for you but it's written by someone else, or using something that is core to Joomla that you can be pretty sure is going to be fairly stable. But the benefits of all of these are that they're really easy to install. I mean, you just download the installer and upload it, and pretty soon you'll just be able to click from the App Store and install it that way. So they're very, very easy to install. And you can install these on a local machine. If you set up a local host on your computer or set up a development domain on your web server, that's what I recommend when you're trying out new stuff. Don't try it out on a live site, ever. Whatever you think, even if it's not a busy site, don't try out new extensions on a live site. Try it out on a test bed where it doesn't matter if you break the world, because I've broken the world several times. And they're pretty easy to get to grips with. But the challenge is, well, how do you choose which one to use? And really, the only way you can choose which one to use is by having a go and by seeing what they do and by having a play around. Then you get a feel for what are the pros and cons of each one. How would I use that for this website? If it's for your own sites, then you've got a pretty good idea of what you want, and it might not be too complex, so you might well just stick with content. When you start doing sites for clients and they're like, oh, and I want this, and I want this to look like that, and I want da-da-da-da-da, and they come up with all these magical ideas from Planet Fairyland, that's when it gets a bit more challenging, and you have to start thinking about, how am I going to actually do that? And the most important thing is getting the right tool for the job, and not giving yourself a whole ton of work with a tiny saw when you could get a chainsaw and chop it down. And again, a lot of this comes from experience. Are any of you guys in Joomla user groups, or have anyone nearby you who does Joomla? No? I mean, that is a really helpful avenue of finding out which tool is right for the job. If you kind of ask other people, I'd like to have this kind of blogging system on my site, what could I use for it? Would K2 be any good? Would this be any good? That's a good place to start. But as I mentioned, some of them are replacements for Joomla Core. So you get a nice new shiny car with a bow around it. K2 replaces the Joomla Core. So rather than using COM content tables, you're using COM K2 tables. And so does Zoo. So they're ones that you would have a whole set of new tables, and you are dependent on those extensions updating for you. So when you have a new version of Joomla, you would need to wait for these extensions to be updated. You would for SCBlod 2, but these are more kind of critical because they use their own tables. And sometimes that's a real sticking point. For example, when we had 1.6 and 1.7, which were short-term releases before 2.5, K2 developers turned around and said, we're not going to release the version. Well, my clients see 1.7 is the latest version of Joomla. I want my website developed in 1.7. And I know that they need to use K2. That puts me between a rock and a hard place, because I can't do a site in 1.7 until that developer makes it for 1.7. But that's kind of a problem that you will have with any extension in that regard.
Grace,
Yeah?
apart from that side of it, just extensions in general,
Yeah.
Because they're replacing the core functionality, and Joomla's core functionality is being enhanced all the time.
Yeah.
Quite a lot in 3.2.
Yeah.
There's two questions I suppose I've got at that point, which is I'm fairly comfy. Certainly K2 is likely to carry on for some time and be upgraded, so it'll be available. How much am I potentially putting myself at having moved away from the core functionality that I'm going to lose some of the features that core functionality is going to bring because K2 isn't looking at them?
Yeah.
And then the other side of it is if I'm using other extensions or other parts of the site, because we're not using content, the integration with, everything will integrate with the core, but the integration to K2 and Zoom and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, that is the question to ask. From my experience, K2 has been quicker at bringing in new functionality than core Joomla, just purely from the politics side of things, that it takes a while for stuff to actually get into Joomla. In terms of integrating other parts of your website, if you use K2, nearly every content module that is created will support, not the core Joomla ones, but if you get a slider module or something, generally they'll support content and K2. They're the most popular ways of doing articles. You probably would get less that would support Zoo and Seblod because they're not as popular as K2, for example.
So is it consideration to just check that if you're looking for something else that it supports?
Yes. Yes. So if you were thinking about moving a website that does currently use content into K2, there is an import function, so it can import all your categories and all of your articles into K2 automatically for you, so you don't have to do anything in that regard. But any modules that you're using to show content, so sliders, recent posts, anything like that, you'd have to turn to the K2 versions thereof. But K2 ships with a module called Content Tools, K2 Tools, what's it called? K2 Content, I think, which is incredibly powerful. I mean, it is incredibly powerful. And with using module overrides, which is where you can change the layout and you save it in your template folder so that when you update the extension, you don't lose your layout changes, means you can have the same, you're using the same module, and here it's a slider that's going across, and here it's just a list, and over here it's like a picture page with 4 pictures. It's the same module, you've just got different settings. So there are a lot of really cool things that actually come within K2, and I'll show you a couple of websites that we've developed in K2, so you can see what how it actually works, how it actually looks, and the kind of things that you can do with it. So Seblod is one of the ones which is a core enhancement. So you kind of add a turbo engine onto the car and paint it look pretty colours. So it uses the core functionality of Joomla, and then it adds stuff onto the outside. And it adds a lot of really cool stuff. It really does. The only thing I'd say about this extension is that it is quite complicated, and there is great documentation, but it's one of those ones that you kind of sit at it and go, right, so what am I supposed to do with all these funky drop-down things and slidey things? And because you have to do quite a bit of configuration to get it to do what you want to do. On the flip side of that, with K2, you have one tab for your articles, then you have another tab that says image, and you just press a button to upload the image like you would in anything else. You have another tab for image gallery, another tab for extra fields. So that's quite a simple, easy way to navigate. That's very similar to the articles that you use in Joomla. But as you've just mentioned, the things that I would suggest that you look for when you're considering trying these out, is it Joomla 3 ready? It's really important. Now, if there's an extension that's not got a Joomla 3 version, I would be seriously questioning whether I'd be using it, particularly if it was for a commercial project or for anything that needs longevity, because there should be by now. Even if it's a testing version, there should be a version for Joomla 3. And the other thing is, what are the developers like? I don't particularly get on very well with Photos, you probably shouldn't record that, but are there developers actively working on it? When was the last time that they released an update? If somebody says there's a problem, does somebody reply on the forums? Or are there loads and loads of posts that never get answered? Because if you have a problem with it, you want to know that somebody's going to be able to answer you. If you get stuck trying to implement something and you put a post on the forum, you want to be fairly confident that there's someone who might be able to help you with that. And that is where some people get stuck with extensions. Either you have to pay for support and you're not willing to pay, or you have free support and nobody answers you. So I would certainly look at that. Other things about developers is, are there other extensions, which is kind of what Ian was talking about. Are there other things that plug into that system that allow you to do funky stuff? So a lot of templates from Rocket Theme, from Joomla, places like that, will have K2 overrides. So they will have styling specifically for K2 that makes it look good and styles it in line with the template so that there's continuity, so that it looks like the template looks. You don't tend to get that so much for Zoo, although you would if it was a U-theme template, because U-theme write Zoo, so all their templates have Zoo overrides. So yeah, it's looking at things like if you wanted to implement a photo gallery, can you put a photo gallery into the K2 article? You know, is there a little button that you can press that lets you put the gallery in? All of that kind of thing is something that is important to consider when you're looking at choosing a content construction kit. The third-party extensions are really important. So if you want to add extra functionality, if you want to have, one of the things that we're being asked to do quite a lot at the moment is, do you know these like waterfall layouts where you have lots of small cards and they fill up all the space on the page, and then when you scroll down it loads more, and you scroll down it loads more. Don't know if you've seen those. It's like a pinball, kind of like Pinterest. You seen Pinterest? Yeah, kind of like Pinterest. As you scroll, it makes a little card for each article, and then as you scroll down, other cards appear and it fills up all the space on the screen. Well, if you want to do that with K2 articles, you need to make sure that it actually supports K2, because some extensions will only be com content. Others will have com content and K2. So the big thing for me when I first started was, am I going to go for a CCK that I can just pick up and understand and I can run with, and I can, you know, I might only understand the real basics of it, like how to import my content from com content and how to turn off the title and how to make the paragraph look like this and so forth. Or am I going to spend time reading up on the configuration for one that's slightly more complex, that I might have more configuration options with? That's dependent on you. It's dependent on how much time you have, and it's dependent on whether you're a techie or whether you just want to be point, click and play. I would say generally K2 is a good one to get started with, which is what I said at the beginning. It's the one that I started with, and I still use it a lot on websites. But it is a bit like this when you get started. You do kind of feel a bit like your head's spinning, especially if you're relatively new to Joomla, because there are lots of options, there's lots of configuration, there are lots of ways that you can change the way things look. So, yeah, a fair warning. Yeah. It's not me. So what I thought we'd do is just have a look at some of the options that you have in styling with K2, really basic options. When you install K2, this is like the default view with, I just installed the default Joomla data and imported it into K2. So this is showing a category. The category is called Joomla. This is an image for the category, so each category can have its own image. You can turn that off or turn it on as you like. This shows the number of articles that are in that category, and this is a little description of the category. And you can have that for all of the categories in K2. It automatically generates an RSS feed for every category. You can turn that on and off if you want, as you don't have to show that there. And then it has child categories. So in this case, we've got a child category called extensions. There's 38 in there. That's the intro text, basically, for the category, the subcategory, the description. So then you could click on this, and it would take you into that category, and you'd view all of the items in that category. And are you guys familiar with the category blog layout in Joomla? Yeah? Maybe? Not quite sure. So the way that K2 is laid out is quite similar to core Joomla. So you have a leading story area, then you have a primary story, secondary story, and then you have a link section. So in K2, just as in content, you can say, show me 5 leading stories, show me 4 primary stories, and divide them into 2 columns, or have them in 1 column, or 3 columns, what have you. Then there's a secondary story, and then you have, these ones are just like, usually just bulleted lists. So it's kind of like a newspaper layout, really. But you can set you could set all of these to 0 and just have secondary story. So you could have none of those and just use secondary story. So it is very configurable. There's lots of different ways that you can use it. What we tend to do is we tend to use primary story in 1 column, get rid of all of these, and the leading story we usually show in a module at the top, just because it gives you more flexibility in terms of showing the articles and so forth. There are loads of configuration options in K2, a lot more than you have in content. So this is showing you some K2 articles. This is category blog layout, so it's just showing you articles one after another as if you were reading a newspaper. So this one here is show the title, so you either say show or hide. This one here is hyperlink that title so that when you click on it, it will take you to the article. Sometimes you might not want that hyperlinked because you might be using read more and you don't want people to be clicking on the title. Featured notice next to the title, so if it's a featured article you can have the words featured written next to it, which I've never actually used. Show the author, item created, date and time. It's got an inbuilt rating system, so you can rate on a scale of 1 to 5, like the core Joomla one does. Does it still have it? I don't know, I always turn it off anyway in 1.5, but it's got its own rating system, so that's hidden at the moment, so you don't see any rating stars. You can choose whether to show or hide an image. So if there was an image associated with this article, it would show here, but we've got it turned off. We've not got any images on these articles. And sometimes you might not want to show the intro text, so you just want to show a list of titles. You can turn that off there as well. And you can also, if you get people who forget to put a read more, you can say, right, we'll chop an intro text at 500 characters or 500 words, whatever, and it will automatically truncate it and put the read more. So you have to click that to go on. Now, extra fields can be assigned to a category. And I mentioned the example of, say, a musician or something along those lines where, I'm trying to think of some other examples. It might be doing a property website. And so every article is about a house that you've got for rent. So your extra fields in that case might be, how much is it per month? What is the deposit? What is the area, which might be a drop-down box perhaps. Do you accept pets? Yes, no. But they're questions that anything that goes into that category, you need to know that information about. So in K2, you can set up extra fields and say, if you're posting something to the rental properties category, answer these questions. Yeah? And then if you try to hit save without completing the extra fields, it pops up and says you've got extra fields that need to be populated. And there's just a tiny tab you press and it says, ask you the question. Choose from the drop-down box, choose from the select box, so forth. So this is saying, do I want to show that in the list layout? Usually you wouldn't show it in the list layout, but if it was a property rental site, when you're looking at a big list of them, you might. You might want to show that in a little box. So you could turn that to show, and that would show the extra fields in this listing. The hits is the same idea as Joomla articles. Show the category. So we can show what category this is in, user modules, for example. And tags. K2 was one of the first to introduce a tagging system. And that's one of the reasons why I started looking at it quite seriously, because there was no multi-category system in Joomla, and there was no tagging system. When this came out, it not only is it good for SEO, but it's also good for the user experience. If they're reading an article on your website and it's about Joomla, and they want to know what else you write about Joomla, they can click on the tag of Joomla, and then they can go to all the articles on your site that you've written about Joomla. So when K2 started doing tagging, I was like, amazing. And it also allows you to do fixed tagging. So you specify the tags as an administrator, and they can only use those tags. People who use the site can only use the specified tags, or you can let them do free tagging. So they type their own tags and hit enter. Depends on how many typos you're likely to get as to whether you use fixed ones or free tagging. quite a lot in business, they will want to specify tags and not allow people to use their own tags. So it's useful to have that feature. You can also attach things like PDF files to an article. So one of the websites that we've done in K2 was for a company who are concrete specialists. Didn't even know that they existed, but there we go. Industry specialists in concrete. And their website, each page is information about a product that they sell, which is a type of concrete. There's about 100. And each page they had to attach a product information sheet. So the way they do that is their product information sheet is just written in Word. They make a PDF file by printing it to PDF, and then they attach it onto the article. So, but they don't show it in this view. They show it when you actually go into the information about the product. So you're reading through the information, and then at one point you can click on, it's either at the top or the bottom, I can't remember, click on the link and download it. And K2 also integrates with video, so you can attach video to an article. And the way that works is you can either look for a video on your server, or you can just post in the URL from YouTube, which is really great for people who don't want to do embed code and blah blah. You paste in the code from YouTube, it automatically detects that it's YouTube, detects the video ID, and it throws all the information into your article for you. So you don't have to even touch it. It just puts it at the bottom of the article as a related video. So that's a really nice feature. And there's all kinds of other things that it does, image galleries and so forth. But all of this you can change at a category level. So at the category level you can say what shows here, but you can also change what it looks like when you're looking at an individual article. So this is an individual article. When I've clicked on the link, read more, or clicked on the title, and you can see here we do want rating to show. We don't want it to show on the listing page because they haven't read the whole article then. You only really want someone to rate it when they've read the article. The same as down here, we've got social sharing. You don't really want people to be sharing something they haven't read fully. And also it takes up space on the screen, and you want to show lots of articles, you might turn that off. So over here you can see that we're showing the date and the time up here. We're showing the title, we're showing the author, written by Joomla. Print, email, and be the first to comment. You can change those into icons if you want to, it doesn't have to be text. And then the social buttons, I don't think I've got any social information in there. And here you can see that we've set it to show the ratings. So when you're actually in the article view, it's showing the ratings, but when you're in the category view, it wasn't. So you've got two different views that you can change there. If we had an image there, it would be showing the image. And it's showing the intro text and the full text. You can see that here, they're set to show. And if there were extra fields, that would show as well. The modified date and time is shown, but I think I've cut it off the bottom here. And there's also other things you can do, like encouraging cross-browsing on your website. So if somebody comes to your blog and they read your article, if you're using the tagging system, you can show at the bottom, here are other articles that are related to this one, because they use the same tag. So somebody reads through your article, they get to the bottom and they see related articles. So it increases the likelihood that somebody's going to look at some other content on your website. Now in Joomla 3 we've got tagging native, but that's been in the, well, we've been waiting for tagging for how many years? 4 years, 5 years? And it's been in K2 for forever and a day. So it's something that K2 are very, very forward thinking in that respect, to actually implement that kind of system. It also allows you to show at the bottom information about the author, so like a little bio about the author, or you can hide it if it's not relevant to do so. An example of where that bit is used a lot is on magazine.joomla.org. Magazine.joomla.org uses K2. So that's a good example of a website that you can see that's done a lot of extending what you could do in Joomla by using K2.
So dateline, is it?
Sorry?
Dateline under each article, is it the author each?
The author, it puts the bio image, it puts the author's biography, social links, email address, website, and so forth. Yeah, well, you can control what shows. So show the author image, show the author description, show the URL, show the email, show the latest articles that they've written. So you can show the latest 5 articles, for example. So there's lots of configuration there. It also has its own native inbuilt commenting system in K2. It's not wonderful, but it's pretty basic. It does get spammed a bit, so it's sensible to put a capture on it. But it's there, and again, it was one of the first ones that actually included that natively, to include comments natively. So there's just a few extensions that I've come across that I found really helpful that have taken me a little while to find. And the majority of them actually I found either through people on the forums, Joomla forums, or I found through my user group, or I found through having a specific problem that I needed. CSS for K2, really, really nifty extension. And what this allows you to do is to drop a CSS file into the template folder for K2. So have you guys come across template overrides before? You've heard about them? Yeah. Okay. So template overrides allow you to change the layout and the styling of your website and put that into your template so that when you update K2, you don't lose your changes. So what you used to do is to change it in the core, and then every time you update, you'd have to reapply the changes, which is a royal pain in the backside. So now we have this ability to use template overrides. What this allows you to do is you would make a template override maybe for each category. So you would say, for my books section of my website, I want the layout to look like this. But for the car section, I want it to look like that. Now, without this extension, you can't really change the CSS properly. You can change the CSS by using inline CSS, where you actually manually type stuff into the PHP, and that's nasty. We don't like doing nasty stuff. It's poor practice to do that. But this extension lets you drop in a style sheet into your template override so that it uses that styling only in that category. So it means you could have your book section red with flashing colours and change the background to green. And then in your cars section, it's black with white text and, I don't know, something else funky happening. And that's something that you couldn't do in core Joomla. You could do it with page class suffixes and what have you, but this is just a really elegant way of doing it. And it allows you to make different areas of your site visually completely different. There's also an extension that lets you add content into more than one category. So if you're writing an article that's about books and cars, you would be able to add it into the category of books and add it into the category of cars. And you would say which one is the main category. For search engine friendly purposes, you would say which one is the main category. But it does work very nicely, particularly on news sites, for example, if they go into a region and a topic. And then you can have tags as well. There's also the ability to integrate K2 with Virtumart. And Virtumart, if anyone's used it, is an ugly piece of blur. It's the best thing I can say about it. What this does is it allows you to actually bring Virtumart items into your K2 pages so that you can have the add to cart and the product information and blah, blah, and you can style it all really nicely. And the interface is just a lot better. It's a lot prettier. It's a lot easier to use. And if you're used to using, that's Chris on his motorbike. If you're used to using K2, then it's a great way of just keeping everything in one place for people to edit. So there are all kinds of funky things you can do with your website and that you can do with K2. What I thought we'd do is have a look at a couple of sites that we've designed in K2. How are we doing for time?
I'm pretty interested in watching it.
I think we've not got that much.
5 minutes, 10 minutes.
Okay.
Just one quickie.
Yep.
You mentioned Virtumart.
Yep.
Has it got any other integrations to other shops?
Not as far as I'm aware. If you were using Zoo, they can integrate with Tienda. But I don't know of any that integrate with RedShop or anything like that. So there is a plugin for Virtumart called VM Product Snapshot, and that allows you to bring Virtumart into content, K2, anything really. It uses it as a plugin to render the buy now bit. So Are there any questions so far? No? Okay. This is one of the websites that we've done in K2. It was a bit of an adventure because it's a very large multinational portal, which is a maritime news industry. So it has 24/7 availability on anywhere in the world, and it had to have a response time of less than 3 seconds, which is not fun when you've got someone on a dial-up connection in Singapore trying to. And that was unfortunately a bit of a shock to the system when we went live. So this is entirely done in K2, and content is added into a country area. So you've got Middle East, Europe, Asia, and America. But it's also added into a topic area. So it might be, if I come out of this, I should be able to show you. It's also added into a topic area, so tankers, cruise, freight, industry, that kind of thing. Sorry?
I think I prefer our club website for content. I was just reading the articles there.
This is the challenge. Is the Wi-Fi going to work? So here's the website. My power's not charging for some reason. I think the power strip's off. So we've got countries, but you've also got industry sector. So if I click on Asia or Europe, it will show me all the articles in Asia. And this is using a module, K2 content module here. This is a K2 content module here. So you can see visually they're very different. One's showing images, one's not showing images, one's in a list, one's not showing intro text. Another one here, which is using just the normal K2 content module. But then if I look at an article, this is an extra field. So it's from Singapore is put in as an extra field. When an editor writes an article, they write where they're writing it from. And this pulls in the author's name and with a link to their profile. And if we scroll down to the bottom here, these are the categories that it's been published in. So we're using multiple categories because it needs to go under Asia, but also dry cargo and finance and insurance.
It's smooth, you find you have to educate the people a bit more, do they put the wrong things in the fields and mess it up?
Yeah, I mean that's an important part of any web design project is giving people clear instructions on how to use what you've created for them. And in this case, the challenge is always getting them to choose which one is the master category, the main category. If you look at the URL, you'll notice that Asia is in the URL. That means that Asia is the main category that they've chosen. But that might be dry containers, it might be. And the reason that's important for this site is they have a ton of advertising that they sell all over the world, multi-million-pound advertisings. And the advertising banners are based on the item ID of the master category. So when they're writing an article, they have to choose which category is the appropriate one for that article, because that's the one that the banners are going to show. These banners are all associated with the Asia category, and they're sold as Asia banners, basically. So it's quite a complicated project. This is also a module that shows the next 20 headlines, I think it is, that they can then scroll through. So again, it's encouraging cross-browsing, encouraging people to view the other articles. And then if we were to go into, for example, oh, I can't get onto it. Dry cargo, goodness knows what that is. So it's amazing what you learn doing web design projects. Yeah. So this is just these news bits are just about dry cargo and dry bulk shipping, whatever that means. So yeah, and this here is the latest 20 news stories from this category that aren't showing here. So I'm not sure what else we've got here that's K2. Oh, this one is K2. This is pulling from a particular category, which is their product news. And the industry sector is done using tags. So in this section, I could drill down just by offshore search, and then this should refresh to only show me offshore news. And then when I click on one of them, it gives me what that article was.
Bruce,
Yep.
you've got 4 minutes to your next presentation.
Okay, that's fine. So that's one website. Another one that we've done, which is very different, was Blue Ventures. And Blue Ventures are a community conservation organisation who do a lot of work in Madagascar and Belize. This website is entirely K2, and it was migrated from content into K2 because they wanted to do a hell of a lot of styling and very specific styling in different categories and so forth. And at the time, it was the only way that we were able to do it. So, what have I done there? If we go into what we do, this is just a category blog layout with 2 columns with a read more showing, with the image for each article. So it's a very basic layout. It's just like you would do in normal content. But the other thing that they needed was the ACL, the access control level. They wanted certain members of staff to only be able to write into certain categories. Some members of staff only be able to publish into certain categories, only to publish their own articles in certain categories. So at the time when we did this, the K2 was pretty much the only way that we could do that. Just lastly, the other funky bit was in the media bit. This is all their press releases and stuff that's automatically chunked into years, 2013, 2012. And any that were radio automatically have this icon associated with it. So they're only audio, they don't have any video and so forth. So it's quite a powerful system. It can also power extremely basic websites if you need it to. It's something that I would definitely encourage you to jump into, have a go with, see what you think about it, and yeah, have a play. If you have any questions, I'm more than happy to help. Just drop me an email, tweet me, what have you, and let me know how you get on. Are there any questions at all at the moment? Anything you'd like to know?
One very quick thing, I've noticed on the thing with Zoom that it had the jQuery integration. Is there something similar in K2 where you basically got somebody that wants to be able to bring up all the parts that they've got for sale and just have a sort of search thing on that, but he wanted to do it from a spreadsheet that he would load into a database table.
Okay.
So it's just if there was an easy way of querying the database.
An easy way of querying the database?
Yeah, basically doing a MySQL query and then putting the results out as part of the actual web page.
Yes, but you probably use an extension for that.
Right.
I think you probably would in content as well.
Right.
I'm not entirely sure what you mean, but maybe we can talk about it later. I might be able to give you a more coherent answer.